It is time to do the video on keeping your car cool by investigating what you can do with a camshaft. Well, the camshaft's buried down in there, so there's no point in showing you the motor because I can't show you the camshaft. So what do I do to start a video like this? Well, I usually go back to the motivation for the video, and what really got me thinking about the camshaft. Originally, it was probably about a year ago, and there's a forum that I'm a member of, the Missouri Can Volkswagen Club forum, and somebody had just purchased a bug or a gear, something like that, and people were giving them advice on what to do. And as you would expect, hopefully you've heard this, somebody said, remember, you want to keep it cool, you drive it like you stole it. So it's the driving you like you stole it. So let me transition from that to another anecdote. This is the first new car that I ever bought. All right, I bought this thing when I was 29 years old, but this car is the first thing I ever bought at all. I'm the third owner of this car. I bought it when I was 19, a couple months before I turned 20. So I've owned this thing now for a little bit over 42 years. And when I first got it, of course, the engine was tired. It had something like, who knows, 96,000 miles on it, whatnot. And in very short order, it began to protest its life. And I got kind of pissed at it, just decided back then, you know what, stock motors absolutely suck. And I stand by that. Stock motors absolutely suck. Thus is born, my channel, decades later. But when I started rebuilding these things, if you watch my videos, you know that I was working with Carsey's mileage book. And how do you get like 50 miles to the gallon out of one of these things? Well, getting 50 miles per gallon out of one of these things is, I'm going to say it right now, absolutely flat out impossible. In order for this thing to get 50 miles per gallon, you'd have to alter its aerodynamics. They are just an aerodynamic pig, and the motors are antique. They don't have the things that they need in order to achieve 50 miles to the gallon. I don't care who tells you that they can get it, that they have got it. If you think that you're getting it, you're not. You can't get 50 miles per gallon out of these things. You can do pretty decently, but yeah, forget that. Not at 65 miles an hour. You're not going to get it. But when I started working on these things, I had a guy I was working with, so we built a bunch of stuff, and it just tore up and it tore up. And at some point, I realized that I had advanced beyond the capabilities of that particular mechanic. And I started working on it on my own, and on probably about the fourth iteration of this motor, I finally got the thing working. And of course, my dad wanted to drive it, and this is where it gets good. My dad, the very first car that he and my mom had, I think after they got married, was a hand-me-down, like 61, 62 Beetle, something like that, way back in the early 1960s. And they got it from my mother's father. Who knows, the car was like 1 or 2 years old. Well, that car had a 1200cc motor, probably didn't go any more than 60 miles an hour, and how did you drive it? You put your foot on the gas and you just hammered it everywhere you went. In other words, you took that car and you drove it like you stole it. So the very first time I ever heard the old drive it like you stole it was from my dad. However, I had just built this thing with a John Carsey miler setup. In other words, Carsey's philosophy was low RPM and don't drive it like you stole it. So I take it out there with my dad, and we're just driving around, and he's got the thing in third gear. And we're basically like bopping down roads at 45 or 50 miles an hour at 4,500 RPMs. His dad just refused to shift the gears because, well, if you shifted into the fourth, you were no longer driving it like you stole it. It didn't matter whether you could drive it in fourth gear, you didn't, until you got out on the highway. So anytime we were on the back roads, he would just sit there and leave it in third gear, and we'd just drive the living snot out of it. And yeah, so anyway, well, these videos are about cooling, and you know what? Driving it like that did not make this, with its 1.4 liter Carsey miler motor. I mean, it was genuinely pretty much on Carsey's design philosophy. with the cam, the displacement, the carburation, everything was there. No, you don't drive it like you stole it. That was my first introduction to the drive it like you stole it. My father.
Well, going from my dad's story and hitting the first forum, somebody out there is going to tell you to drive it like you stole it. So is it just here in the United States, or do you get it like wherever you go? Well, the Volkswagen, I think, is primarily Great Britain. So you got some guy over here, and sure enough, each and every people around me constantly, I'm reading this right here, saying that air-cooled loves to be driven at high revs. Gear shift at low rev, kill the engine. High revs of crankshaft, he's quoted this, so he must have caught this somewhere from somebody. But anyway, high revs of crankshaft means high rev of cooling fan, which results with better cooling. All right, so everybody's told you this. But, this video being about camshafts, well, the camshaft is pretty much what determines what is and is not high rev for your vehicle. In my particular case, I have a Carsey Miler cam. It's an extremely low RPM cam. I mean, extremely low. So if you drive it like you stole it, the thing just screams and protests and says, hey, you need to stick me in a higher gear. Get me out of third, put me in fourth. Like I said, this is what happened to my dad. He just refused to shift. Anyway, yeah, it's pretty much universal. And I don't know, in a word, nah. You drive it in the vicinity of peak torque, not peak horsepower. So why would I say something like that? Well, you come over here and you look at things like this. Now, this happens to be a Saturn motor from about 1990. Line 4, similar displacement to what a lot of us run. Anyway, over here in the red, this is the area where you get peak efficiency. That means more of the energy going into the system is going into output to drive you down the road, which means your motor is going to run at its coolest in the vicinity of this red area. In the case of this particular Saturn, that's going to be around 2,500. That's also pretty much the case of my Carsey Miler camshaft. It's probably around 3,000 for a stocker. And you get into like the Angle W series, and they just kind of move from 3,000 up to 4,000, 4,500, and they just keep going. Well past what my channel's about. This area right in here, peak torque. This little bump over here on the Saturn motor, it is caused by a tuned port induction system. So that lump up there doesn't actually exist in something like a Volkswagen motor. So we just get this single bulge of peak torque, and we should be driving in the vicinity of peak torque. So the question is, well, what is peak torque for our motors? This takes a bit of digging around. You can go and find articles that are like saying Road and Track or Car and Driver that are from whatever the vintage is that you're interested in. But this is particularly interesting. Home-built airplanes. There's a guy over here, right there, Vigilant One. He's gone out and found himself a manual from Volkswagen that has the horsepower and torque curves in it. And if you read down in here, it says printed in Germany. Anyway, this is from the factory. So they've gone out and they've done, as he says right up in here, it says single port 1600cc engine. Now, they didn't come from the factory in the United States as 1600 single ports. So the factory's gone out, taken some single ports and a single port induction system and stuck it on a 1600, and then they tested it. So what you get is this particular torque curve right here. Well, this is a horsepower curve up in here. This is your torque curve. Notice it's got a lump, so it's going to be most efficient in the vicinity of this lump. Maybe up and down 200-300 RPMs. It gives you a range of about anywhere from, I don't know, 600 to maybe 1,000 RPMs. Peak horsepower up in this area, and if you look, where's the numbers? The numbers down here at the bottom. Anyway, that peak torque's in the vicinity of like 2,400 RPMs. Peak horsepower looks like it's just short of 4,000 for that single port, and if we come down to the next one, this is a dual port 1600, scaled a little tiny bit differently, but you can see that torque on the dual port is flat, quite a bit flatter than it is on the single port. Peak horsepower up here and just past 4,000, but peak torque is kind of down in this lumpy area, not quite to 3,000, but maybe 2,800. Looks like about 2,000 to 2,800. So a stock dual port got a pretty broad torque range. So you've got a range down here, not drive it like you stole territory, not over here. But down here in peak torque area, this is where you need to be, 2,000 to 3,000, maybe as much as 3,200 with a stock induction system. So what we're looking for are torque and horsepower curves for camshafts that are not stock. Because, yeah, let's face it, you really don't want to be running a stock camshaft. So where does that take you next? Well, here's where you go next. You go over to the browser, you type in the Samba, and you're interested in a dyno curve for maybe an angle 100, maybe a Web 218. Actually, I think a Web 218 is a little bit aggressive. But anyway, a whole bunch of curves pop up. And at this point, you just kind of chase links. Do investigating, and just check stuff out. This is kind of interesting. Let me show you this guy, though. Apparently, if you look over here, simulated horsepower. There's a little piece of software that you can download for Android phones. I don't have a phone, so it won't work for me. There's like a fancy version that you have to pay for and a cheap version that has limited components. But yeah, you plunk your data into this simulator and it'll give you a curve. So just something to think about right there. But like I say, run over to the Samba, investigate, educate yourself. But here's what I would suggest that you do, and lots of people do this. Go over to the Samba and start a brand new thread. And the information that they're going to ask you and want to know are things like, basically, what do you want to do? Here, we're very specific in what we're trying to do. Get torque to where we want it so that our engine runs cool, where we feel as though this is going to be our cooling problem area. Along with a few other things, this happens to be my own personal situation. So where do I want my peak torque? 3,200 RPMs. That happens to be where I drive on the interstate a lot. Compression ratio, okay, that's me again. I think I can get away with 8.5 to 1. My engine, my induction, my exhaust. Don't forget to include heater boxes if you got them. What kind of heads do you got? Don't forget those charts that I showed you. They came from the factory that very clearly indicate that dual port beats single port for torque. Okay, that's one of those things. They'll talk about how grand and glorious the single port torque is. No, dual ports will beat it. The problem with the single ports is they fall on their face, so they feel like they produce a lot of torque, but they don't actually. Look at the charts again. Application, you all know my car, 73 Super Beetle, and I'm trying to cruise on the interstate. I'm trying to be easy on my lifter, boys. This is important. It's one of the questions that they don't necessarily care about. Somebody's going to come on there and tell you to throw this enormous lift cam in there. When what you should probably do if you want huge amounts of lift is get a lower lift cam and put on ratio rockers, which is the next topic, ratio rockers. And I'm, of course, running stock rockers that have been drilled at the push rod end up a little tighter to the pivot, which allows them to have a little bit higher ratio, but they're basically a stock rocker. And my ignition, right now I'm running an 034 instead of the old 009, and I've got a CompuFire and a blue coil. So I could post this in there and they give me some suggestions. Here's a good cam, here's another good cam, whatever. It's a great way of doing it. Start your own thread, ask the questions. And I know that I gripe all the time about mechanics, how they don't understand math, which means they don't understand physics. Ultimately, that means that you can't possibly understand the engineering behind it. But there's a place for experience, and this is one of them. You know, if you build 200 motors, maybe you've built something with that cam that's along this lines. You put it together, you stuck it in the car that's similar to this, and you know how it performs. And that kind of experience, I cannot provide you. You know, it's just not my thing. I'm not gonna, that wasn't my job. My job was not to build motors. My job was to be an engineer and be a computer science person. And I did that to the best of my abilities. And now I'm just like a guy who wants to educate my head. I'd like to help you out, but I can't with it. This is where you got to go. Go to the Samba. Usually I like to end these things with my own personal stuff. And I'd like to say that I'm running in my car exactly what I tell you to do. But I'm not. I have in that car, if you don't already know, I've got the Carsey Myler camshaft. Myler 54, anyway. This camshaft is from about 1981, something like that. It's not the version that he's got in this particular book. He's got like a webcam in here. And by the time I went with what he was doing, which was 1980, well, actually it wasn't 81, I think it was around 1983-ish or so, he switched from webcam and was using a crane cam. So I've got a couple of crane cams down there in the garage, one of which is the absolutely ancient mileage motor cam. It's in my 73. All right, his cam was very specific to what he was trying to do right here. He had, I don't know, they're not big tires, but he had a 388 ring and pinion, an 824th, and at 55 miles an hour, he put it all together. 2600 RPM, I think probably on the low side of that. So he made his camshaft so that it was efficient around 24 to 2600 RPMs, and that's way too low for the kind of driving that I do. Thus, making my choice of camshaft down there right now a bad choice for my type of driving. I wanted to end this thing. There's an awful lot more stuff that I could put into this. I mean, I've got tabs that I've not talked about, and of course, it's always good to have a little bit of a graphic type stuff. This happens to be a stock camshaft, and its timing events in the purple and black. And on the outside are the comparable timing events for cheater cam. If you look over here, it says cheater cam. And this is relevant, not necessarily to the general automotive type guy, but if you're an airplane guy, this becomes valid. The airplane people who are watching my channel, what you guys have is something really, really specific. You guys need to get the peak torque, operate there at high throttle loads, and never really go past it. So an automotive camshaft is really a bad choice for you guys. So what does that leave you? It leaves you custom camshafts. So in order to do a custom camshaft, you kind of have to know what you're doing, which leads you into the valve timing events. Way too much information for this little video. So custom camshafts. I can't imagine that anybody's going to build an engine featuring their own personal custom camshaft. One, you got to go to somebody who's going to build it and build it right. That would be somebody who's not known to be a Volkswagen cam specialist. You'd have to buy something like a Crowler. Sure, Angle says that they can do it, but I wouldn't trust them. Wouldn't trust CB Performance. You can get custom stuff with webcam. Wouldn't go down that road. These guys, they're big, they're V8, but they also do Volkswagen type stuff, and they've got the modern manufacturing techniques and the modern computer-aided profile designs. So if you're going to spend the money for custom, do it right and do something like a Crowler, but it's going to cost you. Custom Volkswagen Type 1, 182 bucks. Well past your standard Angle. And is the benefit going to be there for most of us? No. But this is a video about cooling. And if you customize it a little bit, you can get better cooling off of a camshaft that offers you the torque range that you're looking for. Got to end it somewhere. This is it. Hey, if you're interested in seeing some overlays like what I just showed you, put a comment down. Tell me what you'd like to see. If I get enough comments, enough interest in it, maybe I'll do it. But I think it's not going to happen because I don't imagine that anybody will ever actually pull the trigger on one of these things. Anyway, that ends this one, and I'll do some more stuff later.